So much of it is imprinted before we even have an opportunity to think, before we have an opportunity to take control of the conscious mind. By the time we start thinking about that stuff later, when we're 18 and 25 and 35, and you start to look at your life and say, wow, how did I get, in this situation? If you don't have this kind of information, if you don't have, and you used a great word, if you don't have awareness, that's the most important word. If you don't have awareness of how your mind is structured and how it functions and why you are behaving the way you are, then you can never attempt to pull up those old roots and plant something new in that garden. But most people never come in contact with this information and this powerful tool that says, hey, listen, this is why you're acting this way. Your subconscious is in love with these ideas. You may not have chosen to put them there, but they're there. And if you want to change your results and your behavior, you're going to have to change your belief system, your paradigms, the ideas that are deeply rooted in your subconscious mind.
I'm Casey Main, a jaded, hopelessly romantic, health-conscious party girl searching for meaning. And my mission is simple: to make life better, for myself and for you. I believe real change always comes from within, and the Better You podcast was born to discover hidden parts of ourselves and our stories. A safe place where we have real, honest conversations with people from all walks of life to help better understand ourselves so we can become better versions of ourselves. So come along on this journey of discovery with me so you can become a better you. And welcome back to another episode of the Better You podcast. I am your host, Casey Main, and as always, I thank you so much for being here. Whether you are new to the show or if you've been listening for a while, thank you for deciding to spend the next hour or so with me and this podcast. You guys, if you've been listening for a while, then you're not going to be surprised to hear me say this, but I'm very excited for this episode. But I'm going to get real. I'm going to be totally honest. There are a lot of times before an interview with a guest where I just know it's going to be good. Like, I know a lot about the guest. I've been following their work, and I'm just like super excited for the conversation. And then there are other times like it feels like a little bit more of a gamble. I'm less familiar with the guest and I just kind of don't really know how it's going to go. And so I don't necessarily have the highest of expectations. And to be totally honest, for whatever reason, that was kind of the situation with today's guest. I wasn't extremely familiar with his work or him prior to this conversation. And I didn't know how it was going to go. And oh man, I could not be happier with this turnout. Him and I just totally clicked. Like, this is such an amazing conversation. When I listened back through it, I was just so inspired by the things that we talked about and was just really all like energized and excited again by the conversation. So I love this one. I love so many of them, but I love when guests really take me by surprise with their insight and with really the quality of the conversation. And that is definitely the case with today's episode with Dr. John Chuback. I so thoroughly enjoyed talking with him. He's definitely a guest that I will consider having back on the show because I feel like I could have talked to him for hours. And I think you guys will feel the same way when listening to this conversation. And this is actually going to be a 2-episode week. So on Friday, I will release another episode. And it is with Kate Swoboda, who is the author of The Courage Habit. And the reason I'm doing that is I feel like these conversations fit really nicely together. So today with Dr. Chuback, we talk a lot about our subconscious mind and kind of the programming that we have, and then how we have the power to change that. And so that kind of gets into how we really can create the life we want, and just super really interesting stuff from the difference between like our brain, our mind, and who we are and the role we play and all of that. And then the conversation with Kate, she just gives some really great, very practical, actionable ways to notice like when that programming is happening and like when it's running. And so her thing is courage. And so we'll get into that in Friday's episode, but it fits nicely because she really has this great system of kind of catching yourself when you've got the programming that we talk about today kind of running on autopilot without even realizing it. And so that's why I wanted to air both of these episodes in the same week, because I think they work really well together. And that actually brings up like a good point about this podcast in general that I'm finding just in doing it and everything I'm learning and having these conversations. And I hope you guys are learning as well while listening to them. And it's fun, and you can learn a lot by like absorbing each episode individually, but it's really cool to think about how they all work together and kind of starting to pile that knowledge on top of each other. So I was thinking about it, and if you take today's episode and the conversation that I have with Dr. Chuback and like the concept of this programming that we've got running on autopilot, that we have the power to change, or as you'll see in the episode, more like overwhelm with new programming, but we've got this programming, it stems from early in life, and then that kind of is playing in the background, not so much even in the background, it's like it's creating our lives. And so if you take that concept and then you re-listen to certain episodes, it gets like even more interesting. So for example, and this is the first one I thought of, you could go back to episode 26 where we talk about shame messages with Marnie Batista and really kind of how that plays out in dating and relationships. Or you could look at episode 35 with Soraya Shamali where we're talking really about gender and anger, but just kind of that programming and how that kind of plays into our lives and our emotions. That's super interesting. You could listen to episode 40 with Dr. Karen Anderson about family and like how that programming could play out in those relationships. And then even episode 46 with Dr. Jill McDevitt talking about like sex and kind of what all you're bringing with you into the bedroom. It's super interesting. And then even episode 43 with Dr. Perlmutter, where we talk about kind of our brain and the neuroscience of decision making. So today with Dr. Chuback, we talk about how we are impacted by the external world. So the conversation with Dr. Perlmutter fits in great of kind of like what you need to be doing to even help give your brain a chance to change some of this program. It's just, I don't know, it's all starting to come together in my mind. And as you can tell, I'm super excited about it. So I recommend that you guys kind of think about your takeaways from previous episodes as we continue to learn more with new guests and just kind of pile them all together. It's just super fun. All right, so that is like my nerd out rant for right now. Let's talk a little bit more about today's guest. So John Chuback is board certified in general surgery and cardiovascular surgery. He received his MD from Rutgers University and has been in private practice in Paramus, New Jersey for 16 years. Dr. Chuback is also a successful entrepreneur. He is the founder and chief medical officer of Chuback Medical Group, founder and managing member of Elant Hill LLC, and the nutraceutical company BiosupportMD. He is the recipient of the Patient's Choice Award and Compassionate Doctor recognition, amongst many other honors. Dr. Chuback founded Chuback Education, LLC, which offers audio programs on subjects like weight management, smoking cessation, personal development, and academic achievement. And he is the author of Make Your Own Damn Cheese, Understanding, Navigating, and Mastering the Three Mazes of Success, and Kaboing, 50 Ideas That Will Springboard You to Academic Greatness. And in this episode, we discuss his medical background and what caused him to enter the world of personal and spiritual development, the difference between your strengths, your passions, and your interests, a synopsis of the book Who Moved My Cheese and why it so profoundly impacted his life, how easily we can end up in a life that doesn't feel right or fulfilling and why that happens, the difference between real thinking versus mental activity that we view as thinking, the objective and subjective parts of our minds, when they are developed and how they interact, the relationship between the body, the brain, the mind, and you, how to recognize the programming in our minds that isn't working for us and what to do about it, how to shift your mindset from blaming others to taking personal accountability, and finally, what exactly we need to do to reprogram our minds, or like the title of his book, make our own damn cheese. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and just jump into this amazing conversation. Don't forget, there will be another amazing conversation aired on Friday, so you get 2 episodes this week. I hope you enjoy them both, and here we go. Time to talk to Dr. Chuback. Okay, so I guess let's start with a little bit of kind of who you are and your background, and then we'll jump into talking about cheese.
Well, my background, I guess, is interesting in a way. My formal training is in cardiovascular surgery, open heart surgery, where for years I was in private practice doing triple bypasses and valve replacements and things like that. Had a very, I guess, lengthy and rigorous formal academic background to get to that point. Practiced open heart surgery for about 6 years. And in that period of time, although I was very successful professionally in terms of outcomes and results and so forth, practicing here in northern New Jersey, right outside of New York City, I really found after a very long road that it wasn't what I wanted to spend my life doing. And so around that time, this is in 2002 to 2006-07 period of time, I started a new educational process in sort of personal fulfillment and personal development, and that was just a magnificent process that led me down a totally new road. And I pivoted in my career. I'm still a surgeon. I still do vascular surgery, but now it's office-based, focused on venous disease and varicose veins, and a very different lifestyle. And that practice developed in many directions, which has been very fruitful. But it was something I could have never foreseen, and it was something I really could have never done without the formal study of personal development and introspection. And after almost 20 years now in practice, it's in the last 4 or 5 years that I felt that I had something to add to that conversation of personal development and growth, because I had sort of traveled, a long and interesting and I think successful and arduous road. And that's when I began, getting involved in education and writing some books, and that's how we wound up here together today.
Okay, so I'm curious, kind of what sparked your interest in personal development and going down that path? Like, were you always interested? Were you just completely neutral? Were you against it? Or like, what kind of led you in that direction?
Well, I think that that's a fantastic question, because I was, in a sense, always on a journey of personal development. I was a pretty driven young man. And my father was a physician and my mother was a nurse. And we were heavily influenced from childhood that we should become professional people, have a formal academic education, and so forth. I have 3 older sisters and myself, and my sisters, 2 are dentists and 1 is a lawyer. And so that professional path was not an accident. And I write quite a bit about that in my latest book, about how those paradigms and belief systems are formed from childhood and through outside influence. So academically, intellectually, I was on a path of personal development in the first 33 years. It took 33 years to become a cardiac surgeon. That was the quickest route there at the time. As I said, I was a pretty driven young person. So that was 4 years of college and 4 years of medical school and 5 years of general surgery and 2 years of cardiovascular open heart surgery. So that was 15 years after finishing high school. So I was I was heavily into personal development and growth. I didn't see it that way. I just saw that I was living my life and I was on a career path and an educational path. But in terms of the other aspect of personal development, in terms of the spiritual part, personal growth, making real choices for yourself, really thinking about what's going on inside yourself and where you fit in this world and so on, that aspect definitely began after I was in practice a year or two doing open heart surgery and just not being happy getting up and going to work every day. And and it was one of the fascinating things that I share with people. Because you're good at something doesn't mean you're going to like it. And on the flip
Mhm.
side, I hate to say this, but because you're not very good at something doesn't mean you're not going to love it. I had colleagues in my profession, none of whom were, you know, horrendous or more than three standard deviations outside the mean, but certainly we're not the most talented surgeons in the world, but they just absolutely loved doing what they did. I mean, it was like a joy for them. And then there were those of us who were really technically superior in many ways, who just were looking for other things to do. And it's not limited to my profession. I think it's seen in every single profession that there can be people who are really good at what they do, very talented, but just not finding the kind of fulfillment or reward they anticipated, and they're looking to go in a new direction. And that's what happened to me in those early years, 2002 to 2005. And I began by reading the book Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson, who was also another physician, ironically. And that's really where my formal pursuit of personal growth and expression really began.
I love that you bring up the point that just because you're good at something doesn't mean it's necessarily going to bring fulfillment, because I think that's a trap a lot of us can easily fall into and think if we're really skilled at something that, oh, okay, this is my passion or this is my purpose. It can kind of get wrapped up in those things. But then when it doesn't bring us the fulfillment we would expect it to, it's like we aren't as open to even acknowledging that because we think it should, because we're so good at it and we tend to live in a very success driven environment. So I think that's a really good point that a lot of people don't necessarily acknowledge and then, take it a step further to kind of make the move or make the jump over to something that would bring them more fulfillment.
Yeah, I think it's critically important, and it's not only the issue of um, doing something well. It also goes, and this is important, especially important for young people, I think, to hear. It also goes to what other people perceive as where your strengths may lie for various reasons. In other words, we've all known the guy who's 6 feet 7 inches tall that everybody assumes should be the next, Michael Jordan or Larry Bird. But that young person, male or female, is not interested in playing basketball for whatever reason. Maybe they want to play the violin, in the orchestra.
Mhm.
But because they have certain physical attributes or intellectual attributes or, whatever it is, doesn't mean that that's where their interests are going to lie. And that's a big part of this message, that we have to pursue what's in our heart.
Yes, I could not agree more. Okay, so let's start talking about cheese because so you mentioned the book Who Moved My Cheese, which was back in 2009, I believe. So for people who didn't read that book, myself included, that was way before I was into the personal development world. But I did look it up a little bit and see that it's really all about kind of change and accepting change. But give us a brief kind of synopsis of that book, and then like why it really spoke to you enough to kind of shoot you off into the path of personal development.
Well, in Who Moved My Cheese, um, the the essence of the story is that there's a metaphor used as of mice living in a maze. And those mice live in a corner of a maze, and they also live there with little people. There are a couple of little people, so quote unquote. And in that corner of the maze, the cheese, whatever you take the cheese to be, has dried up. It is no longer coming in great quantities. And so they're left with a choice whether to sit and wait in that corner of the maze for the cheese to somehow spontaneously or magically or mystically reappear, or should they have the courage to go out into the maze, into new areas of the maze, and pursue what they are looking for. And so at that critical point in my career, it was, and this is, I think, another important thing to touch on. It was an important point in the history of open heart surgery. As I was coming out of my training, there was sort of a disruptive technology which had come into the arena, which was minimally invasive coronary artery work and treatment, which was in the form of balloon angioplasty and stents. Now, cardiac surgeons, open heart surgeons, don't do balloon angioplasty and stents. That's done by interventional cardiologists, a completely different group of physicians who have a completely different path of training. So at that time, cardiac surgery was being affected by the volume of cases that were being done. It was very, very diminished as compared to the previous 30 years. And the reimbursement for those cases was being tremendously diminished because there was lots of other new treatments available, and there's only so much money in the kitty, so to speak, to go around to reimburse for these procedures. So it was the winds of change were in the air, and the cheese in my corner of the maze, so to speak, was definitely drying up in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a question of, well, are you just going to sort of put up with it and say, well, times change and things change and this is how it is? Or are you going to go out into the maze and look for some new skills and some new technologies and some new abilities in order to change things? And that's what Spencer Johnson's book was about. He was encouraging people to go in search of what it is that you need, you want, is going to bring you happiness, fulfillment, professionally, financially, personally, et cetera, from every point of view, not just a monetary point of view, but from every point of view. And that's when I read the book and I said, you know what, this is what I have to do. I have to have the courage to make a paradigm shift in my life because, I had spent many years getting to just the beginning stages of a career, and to think right at the beginning, you're going to have to start all over. It was a daunting thing mentally, really tough emotionally.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then just about 10 years later, you kind of flip the script and write a book about making your own damn cheese. So what happened in those 10 years?
Well, in those 10 years, I took Dr. Johnson's advice and I began to look inward and ask myself, simple questions like, how did I get here? Why am I unhappy doing this? Whose idea was this anyway? And again, another fascinating subject. As I said, my father was a physician. I was his only son. He encouraged me very, very strongly from the ages of 4 and 5, when I used to make rounds with him in the hospital on Saturdays and Sundays, that this is what I should do with my life. And so, my subconscious mind, which I talk a lot about in the book, was basically programmed largely by my father and some of his friends who were colleagues of his and so forth, that this is what you should do. And I didn't really think about anything else or consider anything else. And then by the time I was an adult in my, early and mid 30s, and I found myself in this, very, very difficult and stressful profession, I said, although I'm good at this, I'm highly trained and highly skilled and capable, this is not what I want to do for the next 30 or 35 years. Like, how did I get here? So then I got deeper and deeper into personal development and studying other mentors, like some of whom I tip my hat to in my book, like Earl Nightingale and Jim Rohn and Bob Proctor and Dennis Waitley and Brian Tracy and Price Pritchett, and got deeper and deeper into their material of looking inside, trying to understand how the subconscious mind works, why we believe the things we believe, why we behave the way we behave, and why we have the results that we have.
So I love that. And I just think it's so interesting because your and my story are very similar. Like on the surface level, they're very different. I am not a surgeon, nor was I ever. But where they're like deeply rooted the same is kind of we end up in a life and a career doing something we're good at, but realizing you're not happy, and then kind of going back and being like, all right, well, like, how did I get here? And whose idea was this, as you said? And an interesting difference between the two of us is like, yours, as you mentioned, was like very rooted in your subconscious. So for a long time, you probably thought, yes, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do. Whereas like when the minute I sat and really thought back on it, I very immediately recognized it wasn't what I wanted to do, but there were these certain key points in my life where I just folded to what was more normal or what other people thought was best for me. So I think it can look a number of different ways, but I think for a lot of us, we aren't necessarily intentionally making these choices, especially when we're younger. And maybe we're too young to even be aware of that. I don't know, but intentionally making these choices to stay in a career path and in a life that feels right to us and like that we actually chose.
Right. I mean, it obviously applies to any profession, any career, any job, and things beyond that, and personal relationships and that people find themselves in, physical condition, health concerns that people find themselves with, financial issues that people find themselves with, on and on and on. And the question is, did we really make these choices? Did we make any choices at all? Were we thinking at all? And sadly, I think the conclusion I've come to through many years of studying is that most of us aren't thinking at all when it comes to vast swaths, if not all of our life. And the big mistake that we make is that we confuse mental activity with thinking. And the two things are nothing alike. Mental activity we're all experiencing all the time, but so is a squirrel, and so is a cat and a dog. But let's put it this way: if you look at the way so many people live, if they were really thinking, would they live that way?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think so. So, but thinking, as I said, I went through 12 years of school up until high school and another 15 years beyond that. Okay, so that's 27 years of formal education, not including pre-K, which I did too. You're not going to find a lot of people who had more formal education than I have, with more degrees and board certifications and things like that. Could you imagine that in all that time, I could tell you without any doubt, one subject that was never taught was thinking?
Mm-hmm.
I never had a class in thinking. Did you?
No.
I mean,
No.
because everybody assumed we were thinking. You're studying calculus, you must be thinking. Who says? Studying physics, you must be thinking. Learning how the heart-lung machine works, you must be thinking. No, you're memorizing, you're parroting, you're regurgitating, you're being trained. Training is different than education. So in order to make a choice, you have to use the conscious mind very, very deliberately. That's the only place in your mind where choice can occur. The subconscious mind has no ability to choose whatsoever. In fact, the subconscious mind is amoral, not immoral, but amoral. In other words, it doesn't care what you put there. Okay, it's like soil. It's like fertile soil. If you go out into the yard and you till up a plot, you say, I'm going to put a vegetable garden in this summer. Earl Nightingale, one of the things that struck me most in his material, he said, the soil doesn't care if you plant sweet corn, a delicious food, or if you plant nightshade, a deadly poison. It'll bring both up in equal abundance. So the subconscious mind is like that. It cannot choose. It doesn't know good from bad. It doesn't know right from wrong. And it doesn't care. The only place where you have an opportunity to decide what you're going to plant in that subconscious mind and what beliefs you're going to ultimately subscribe to and what behaviors you're going to ultimately fall in love with habitually and determine your results. The only place where you can drive that whole process is in the conscious mind and the thinking mind. And that's where you have the great power of choice, which makes us so exceptional in the universe and certainly the known universe and the animal kingdom. I have a undergraduate degree in biology. Okay. The goose, one of my mentors says, the goose can only fly south in the winter. It has no choice. It doesn't know why it's going south. It doesn't know it's going south. But it can only fly south in the winter. Whereas you and I, we have this incredible gift. We have the ability to choose. You don't have to go south. You can go north or east or west or stay where you are or go sideways. You can go anywhere you want. It's amazing.
Right. And so, okay, so I'm with you on that. That is what separates us from animals, is more like the awareness of thought and the awareness of choice. But I also hear you on the like, okay, so like the subconscious mind is like a garden. So it doesn't care what you plant, whatever you plant, that's what's going to grow. And then that's kind of what becomes your life. But I feel like there's like a middle ground there. And that's what happens to a lot of us, where we're not like, we must be living out of the conscious mind to some degree because we're planting something in the subconscious mind. We're just not aware of it. So like, what's happening there for those of us who are maybe like sleepwalking through life and not being intentional about our
Right.
choices and our thinking and our gardening habits, I'll say,
Right.
like what's going on there?
Well, you put your finger on something very important. The subconscious mind is, the subjective mind. The conscious mind is the objective mind. So what that means is the subconscious mind is subject to whatever it is exposed to through the objective mind. Now, let's start with the child's mind, okay, before the age of, let's say, 6 or 7. The child is thinking, he wakes up, he eats, he can dress himself, he can play and run and swim, and she can go to school and do her hair and, play with her friends and so on and so forth. So there's mental activity going on. But before the age of 6 and 7, the conscious mind is basically completely asleep, as you say, totally asleep. And the subconscious mind is wide open. So if you grow up in an environment where we eat this kind of food and we worship at this kind of church or mosque or synagogue, or we don't worship at all, or we exercise or we don't exercise, we smoke or we don't smoke, we drink or we don't drink, we curse or we don't curse, we go to college or we don't go to college. So much of that programming is done before the age of 6 or 7 or 8, which is why the Jesuits for 400 years have said, give me the boy until the age of 7, and then I'll give him back to you and I'll show you the man. Now, these were the educators of the Catholic Church. I mean, highly educated. I mean, some of the greatest scientists, writers, and so forth, philosophers in the last 400 years. But they understood that if you give me the child until the age of 7, then you can have him back. But I can tell you exactly what that soil is going to grow, how he's going to think, behave, feel. All the belief systems are there. So much of it is imprinted before we even have an opportunity to think, before we have an opportunity to take control of the conscious mind. By the time we start thinking about that stuff later, when we're 18 and 25 and 35, and you start to look at your life and say, wow, how did I get, in this situation? If you don't have this kind of information, if you don't have, and you used a great word, if you don't have awareness, that's the most important word. If you don't have awareness of how your mind is structured and how it functions and why you are behaving the way you are, then you can never attempt to pull up those old roots and plant something new in that garden. But most people never come in contact with this information and this powerful tool that says, hey, listen, this is why you're acting this way. Your subconscious is in love with these ideas. You may not have chosen to put them there, but they're there. And if you want to change your results and your behavior, you're going to have to change your belief system, your paradigms, the ideas that are deeply rooted in your subconscious mind. And the only way to do that is through thinking a new way of thinking repeatedly over and over again for a long period of time.
Okay, gotcha. So this all kind of just clicked in my head as you were talking. So the first 7 years of our life, like you said, our subconscious is kind of just wide open. So it's being programmed by our outside world and just kind of who we come in contact with and the norms within our immediate world.
Everything.
So that's like
everything you can imagine. The reason that you and I are both fluent in English, for example.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So that's like our baseline programming. So then that's what's going to continue to plant the garden, so to speak, until we, quote unquote, wake up to the fact that there is a program running and we have the ability to change it.
Exactly.
And then we have to do the work to change it, which is not as simple as, oh, I'm aware of this and I'm just going to delete and input a new program. It's like a long process.
Exactly. And these are great analogies. So to give you a really timely and apropos analogy, before getting on our call today, as you know, I was a couple of minutes late because I had received the link. And when I went to open the link, I was running Safari and it only runs off of Chrome or Firefox. So if I have software imprinted on my hard drive, programmed on my hard drive for Safari, and the program you want to communicate with me on only runs through Firefox or Chrome, I could do anything I want. I could jump up and down, scream, cry, be disappointed, sue somebody. I could do whatever I want. But the software that you want to communicate with me on will not run on what I have on my hard drive. I have to change my hard drive. I have to download a brand new system, browser, in order to do what I want to do and communicate with you. This is exactly what we're talking about. You have a very complex, not you, we all have, one has, a very, very complex, robust, intricate program imprinted on the subconscious mind, even before the age of 7, that to rewrite that program is a huge deal. It's a big deal. It takes a tremendous amount of effort and time, because just like, to use your analogy again, just like the internet and hard drives and computer technology, which in many ways is, a facsimile for the brain and how the brain works, this hard drive system and software that's put on it, you can never really erase or delete the old program. Mm. It's always there. The only way to overcome it with the human mind and the subconscious mind is to overwhelm it with new software, new software, new software. There's no way to erase the old software.
Interesting. Okay.
Can I give you one quick example of that I think you might like?
Yes, absolutely.
In the first book I wrote, which was called Kaboing, it's sort of like an onomatopoeic thing, like Kaboing, like being Springboard to academic greatness. It was a book for students in terms of academic greatness, but it applies to a lot of areas of life. But in that book, I talk about one of my professors in medical school who was talking to us about memory, because so many of us say, oh my God, how are you going to remember all of this? You go to medical school and you go to gross anatomy, and there's so many structures, thousands of structures that you have to memorize. And because I can't remember all of this. And he used to say, you have an amazing memory. Your memory is absolutely perfect. In fact, he used to say, it's easier to remember things than it is to forget. So he said, if you take the average high school student who's in the school play, he'll remember every line, or she'll remember every line of Macbeth within a few weeks of preparing for the school play. He knows what he has to say, she has to say, what the other actors are going to say on the stage, et cetera, et cetera. So the average intellect can memorize an entire play before graduating high school. You don't need advanced degrees to do that, okay? He said, so if I paid you $1 million to go home and memorize Macbeth in the next 2 weeks, you would come back and you would know it cold. He said, but if I paid you $1 million to go home and forget your first name, I could pay you 10 million, 100 million. If we had a lie detector, if we had some way of verifying it, you couldn't forget the most basic, simple thing. You couldn't forget 2 + 2 is 4. You couldn't forget your address. You couldn't forget who your mother was. You couldn't forget anything. That's how powerful your memory is, once you really know it. And this is the same for the subconscious mind. Once that program is there, it's not like, well, you know what, I just think I'm going to stop drinking. I think I'll quit smoking. I'm an intellectual person. I'm smart. I know that smoking is not good for me. I think I'll just give that up. You say, well, that's a physical habit. That's biological. There's nonsense. Overeating, the same thing. Whatever, not walking, not taking a walk around the block. You're going to tell me there's some biological connection to not walking around the block? Just change your paradigm. I don't do any exercise, and now I want to start walking around the block every day. To change that is to forget the old you, to forget the old program, to leave that person behind. And it's not simple. It's not impossible, but it's hard to do that, especially when you don't have the tools.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense, because I have heard that, we technically remember, like our brain technically stores every single moment that we ever live.
That's correct.
It's just a matter of where it's filed in our brain and our ability to recall it.
Correct.
It's not so much that it isn't there, it's all there. So that makes sense then, that everything that's happening in those first 7 years and the subsequent imprint or programming that results from all those moments and all that information download, that's all going to be there also. Okay.
It's all there. And whether you're conscious of it or not conscious of it, it's there. And that's the power of the subconscious mind. There was a neurosurgeon, very famous neurosurgeon named Dr. Penfield in Montreal, who touched on that, literally and figuratively touched on that by accident. He was doing neurosurgery in awake patients, and he found that when he touched or stimulated certain areas of the brain, patients said, "Oh my God, I'm sitting." Patients awake under surgery, neurosurgery, and she says, "I'm sitting at my 7th birthday party. I see everything. I see the 7 candles on the cake. I see what my mother's wearing. It's not like a memory. I'm seeing it."
Wow.
It's being triggered. And then they found out that everything that we've ever heard or seen or experienced is there in every detail.
That's crazy. I guess that's why there's this statistic out there, and I can't remember exactly what it is, that we only use a small percentage of our brain, in reality.
Well, that's an interesting thing. I think it depends on how you look at that. But I think we use all of our brain. You're using all the different parts of your brain neuroanatomically. But I think, and this is one of the things I try to bring out when I have opportunities to speak to people like this, it's important. My wife has a PhD in neuroscience and neurochemistry. She did a 5-year PhD doing, lab research on neuron regeneration and so forth. So she has a very, very profound understanding of the central and peripheral nervous system. It's important that people understand that the brain and the mind are two totally different things. Your mind is not your brain.
Yes. Okay. Yep.
And the other thing, which is a really fantastic thing to recognize, and believe me, I learned the vast majority of this after my formal education through personal study. One of the things that in my opinion, the great teacher Eckhart Tolle teaches is that the next step in understanding is to understand that you are not your mind. So one is your brain is not your mind, and two is you are not your mind. So what I've come to believe, again, it's personal belief through a lot of study and so forth, but my personal belief is that we are spiritual beings living in a physical body in possession of a mind, just as we're in possession of an arm and a leg and a hand, and you can command your hand to open and close, and we're interacting with the material world. So if a spiritual being living in a physical body in possession of a mind and interacting with the material world. Now, why is that important? That's important because when you recognize yourself as a spiritual being, as the being behind the mind, then and only then can you really take control of the mind and use your mind as an instrument as you wish it to perform. If you confuse yourself as your mind, then it gets very, very difficult to do that.
Yes. Okay. Totally on board with that. Absolutely love that. One of my favorite quotes, and I've mentioned this before in a podcast, and I don't know if it's a Wayne Dyer quote. It might be, but it's not mine, is that we're not human beings who have like a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. And I think
absolutely
that can help in this kind of analogy we're going. So, all right, so we're spiritual beings and we're in this human body, which is like our vehicle.
Correct.
And then the vehicle is being run by a computer system. So the brain is the computer,
Correct.
The hardware,
Correct.
The mind is the software, but we are none of those things. So we are able to reprogram the software that runs the hardware, which then, moves the vehicle around.
Beautiful, beautiful. So the body becomes the instrument of the mind. Okay. The brain is a 3-pound organ, just like your heart or lungs or liver or spleen. It's an organ. It's an electronic switching station. It's a, biochemical and electrical switching station that sits in your skull. That's the brain. Your mind is not an organ. Your mind is an activity. Your mind is in every cell of your being. It's not limited to your head. Okay. So your body is the instrument of the mind. So your mind dictates to your body how it should behave. And the spiritual being, the true you that's on this eternal journey, this being one phase of that eternal journey, the spiritual being uses the mind as an instrument. So the mind is an instrument of the spirit and the body is the instrument of the mind. Now, just to get back to your first question about the 10%, using 10% of the brain. I think what's really more truthful is that probably more of us, because you use your whole brain physiologically, but what's more accurate to say is that we probably use a very tiny percentage of the true potential that we have, and that potential lies mostly in our mind and in our thinking, and the truth is probably more like 1% of our true potential. And it's so beautiful talking to you because I can see, obviously how deeply into this material you are. But when you mentioned the quote from Wayne Dyer, I have another great, I believe it's a Wayne Dyer quote. so forgive me if I'm wrong, but I'm almost certain. And sometimes these people have these quotes attributed to them that they've heard elsewhere, but somebody hears
Right.
Wayne Dyer say it, so it says
Yep.
Wayne Dyer said it. So, but that's immaterial. What's important is the quote itself, which I think is so powerful when you talk about potential. The quote says, anyone can tell you how many seeds are in an apple, but no one can tell you how many apples are in a seed.
Ooh, I like that.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
I mean, think about us. Think about yourself or myself or anyone, a young person. I shared that with my kids the other day. I said, and my kids are, older now, college and law school and everything. They're smart. They get it. I'm not trying to explain that to a 5-year-old. I mean, they really understand the profundity of what I'm saying. But I'm saying, you're at the beginning of your amazing life, and nobody knows how many apples are in you. Nobody knows what you can achieve. Nobody knows what how you can serve, and how many people you can help, and how philanthropic you may be, or what you might discover, and what you might contribute. Nobody knows how many apples are in you yet. You're still a seed. It's amazing. I love it.
It is. I love that. So let me ask you this, because this is something I grapple with a little bit. How important is it that we figure out what our baseline programming is? Like, does it matter? Do we need to know what that is? Or is it just a matter of overwhelming it with a new system?
I think that um, it matters to recognize that the programming that you don't like, that you don't approve of, which is not in harmony with your goals, you recognize they're there, and then you try to overwhelm those. In other words, I think that if you're a really clean eater who eats a lot of organic, foods that are highly nutritious, and when you go to the doctor, your cholesterol is stone cold normal, and your blood pressure is normal, and your blood sugar is normal, and your vitamin levels are tip top, and you're trim, and you have a normal body mass index, and your cardiopulmonary fitness is fantastic. You could run a 5K with no problem. I don't think you need to start looking at what drives your health paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, I think there are things like that you can just accept, however that got programmed that way. Just don't rock the boat. I'm doing great, right? I mean, I don't think I have to look at my academic background, for example, or maybe I should go back to school or get another degree, or maybe
Right, like your work ethic is good. That
I'm
paradigm
good,
is pretty solid.
That paradigm is solid, right? But if you're in a profession and you hate getting up every day to go to work, and you're making good money, I mean, really good money, and you're successful in terms of all of the objective parameters and outcomes that could be measured, but you hate, you're kind of like sick to your stomach the night before when you go to bed, and you'd have to drag yourself out of bed, then you say, like, then that's a thing where you should say, like, how did I wind up here? Like, why am I even doing this? And how did I come to believe that this is who I should be, or this is what I should do? Or how did I get to be, 5 feet 8 inches tall and 290 pounds? Like, why? Why? I don't want to be this person. I don't want to be unhealthy. I don't want to be morbidly obese. I don't want to be at risk of heart disease and diabetes, and increased risk of cancer and stroke and all these things. Like, I'm a smart person. I don't want to be. How did I wind up this way? So that, I think it's important to know that. Because if you don't know that, then it's hard to change it. Because I hate to say it, but the reality is, and that's a big part of everything, is reality. Like, people like us tend to talk about a lot of spiritual things, some things that, might be considered metaphysical, mystical, but there's
Woo-woo.
also right, woo woo, but there's also something called reality, right? And reality is like taxes and, whatever. Reality is that lots of times when you're going to make these changes, you're going to have to change the people you're around. And spend less time and see them less frequently, if at all. In other words, if your reality is that you're an alcoholic and you want to change that, now not every alcoholic wants to change that, quite frankly. As a physician, I can tell you that. But if you're an alcoholic who gets to a point where they do want to change it, you might not be able to, hang out with those people at the bar 4 or 5 times a week to watch the game and eat chicken wings and, do 3 shots and drink 6 beers. You might need to find a new group of friends. So, because if you don't, the behavior is not going to change and the paradigm gets reinforced and the results get reinforced. So if you don't know, I think my friends have something to do with why I am the way I am. Now, it's not about blaming them. You got to take full responsibility for it. It's not about it's Joe and Charlie's fault because they like to drink beer and eat wings. It's my fault because I go and do that with them. But that's what Joe and Charlie like to do. So if I want to, not do that, I can't spend my time with them. So it's very important that those areas, and there's lots of areas of our lives, professional, financial, savings, earnings, right? Because a guy could be or a woman could be a top CEO, a big earner, and have nothing in her bank account. So earning is one thing, saving is another, right? So you look at each individual file in your personal subconscious file cabinet, and you say, how do I like my blood pressure? It's okay. How do I like my blood sugar? Not so much. How do I like my weight? Not so much. How do I like my education? Excellent. How do I like the fact that I smoke? Not at all. How do I like the fact that I don't drink? I'm okay with that. How do I like the fact that I'm a vegetarian? I'm all right with that. So there are many files in there that get a green sticker on them, but there are probably a few that get a yellow or a red.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what it's about. The paradigm, the subconscious, is not one big giant blob. I don't like to think about it that way anyway. I like to think about it as individual things that you can manage and sort of take on one by one. And hopefully you find lots of them that you're really happy with. None of us is a complete mess, I hope.
Right. Okay. So so it's a matter of looking at your life and figuring out like which files aren't working for you, like which files you want to change, and then opening those up to see like where is the programming, and also taking accountability, which you mentioned, which I think is a huge step, because the more somebody lives in the victim mindset of like, this happened to me, the more like you've got to switch that awareness to like, I'm an active participant in my life. I make all these choices in order to change them. But I think it's also like important to understand the programming, because I think that helps you realize that you aren't it, that you're bigger than it. Because, it's like, and this is something similar, I think that Eckhart Tolle talks about a lot. Like if you can see something, you aren't it. So if you can see and understand some of that programming and that paradigm that's in your life and how you make decisions that you're not okay with, if you can look at it and understand it, then it's not one with who you are, so you can change it.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. And as you say, it's not about blame if for no other reason that's not going to be helpful. In other words, let's say you say to yourself, God forbid, I'm neglectful of my children, right? Well, why am I neglectful of the children? Now, let's say even if you go into formal therapy or whatever, and you lay down on the couch and you go through that process, and it becomes pretty obvious. Well, your mother and father neglected you as a kid. That's how you were raised. That's what you thought child rearing was about. Just throw you out in the yard and fend for yourself, or you go out in the street and come back at bedtime and who knows where you are. Okay, so now we put our finger on it. I behave this way toward my children because that's how my parents behaved toward me. Fine. Number one, for many people, your parents are dead and buried by now. So you can't go have them corrected. But even if they're alive and well, to call them and yell at them and scream at them and say, you screwed me up, A, what are they going to do about it? B, are they really going to take responsibility for it? And C, I think one of the most valuable pieces of learning I've done in that area of blame of other people is that no matter what they did to you, generally speaking, they were doing their best. Doesn't mean it was right.
And they were operating off of their system, which
precisely
was also pre-programmed and the same thing.
Precisely. So this is so much work to try to correct my hard drive that I can't take responsibility for the next guys, whether it was my boss, my ex-wife, my mother, my stepfather. I don't have time to, this is not, whatever, PC-matic. I don't have time to go clean up your problem. I'm working hard enough to just take responsibility for my own subconscious, my own paradigms, my own self-concept, my own self-image, and correct that. Now, knowing that I behave that, I overeat, for example, because everybody in my family is 300 pounds and we had no, regard for calories or exercise or anything. Okay, it's obvious now. I know why I'm 300 pounds, but I have to just say, oh, it's because we overeat, we don't exercise. Not blaming anybody, but now I'm going to start to eat properly, calorie restricted, look at the foods I take in, when I eat, how much I eat, quantity, quality, etc. And I'm going to start to move my body a little more, even if I have to start with just a walk around the block and work my way up. But to worry about blaming others and certainly don't go to them to correct your problem, because that's going to be a dead end street.
Right. But those decisions, so even, okay, I'm going to eat healthier, or I'm going to watch my calories, or I'm going to walk around the block, or, I'm going to work harder instead of watch TV all day, or I'm going to not go after the emotionally unavailable men, whatever it is, whatever the things, the files in your life that you want to change. Even making those changes is not as simple or easy as just being aware of it, because I imagine that's where you're really diving down into some of the deeper programming that probably ties into self-worth and lovability and kind of those deeper underlying programs that are running, I guess, the real deep roots below the surface of the garden where the flowers are or the plants are coming out. So how do we start to change that system?
Well, I think one of the words that you touched on, which is, I like words that are similar but don't really mean the same thing, but we tend to use them interchangeably a lot. So this process actually is simple, but that's different from easy. In other words, right? It's simple conceptually. We're talking about really broad strokes. The analogies or metaphors are pretty basic. You've got a hard drive, that's your subconscious mind. You're the programmer, that's the conscious mind, and other people before you could get to it and have an impact on it. We're programming that hard drive, and now you're left with this hard drive that's got a lot of bad, quote unquote, virus code on it. A lot of bad data on there. And now you want to start cleaning it up. How to clean it up is easy. Like, for example, I don't know if your email inbox looks anything like mine, maybe it doesn't, but I've got thousands and thousands of old emails because over the years I just haven't been, conscientious about cleaning it up as time went by. So what's my point? To clean up my email is simple. You go to each one and you look at it and you hit delete, delete, delete. If it's not it, but all of us have probably started on that project some afternoon at the office or whatever. It's like your index finger gets tired. It's like, oh my God, I've deleted 80 of these and there's like 8,000 to go. And then you quit. It's not hard. It's simple conceptually and but it's not easy in the sense that it turns out to be a lot of work that's time consuming and monotonous and whatever. So you have to make a decision. That's where it begins. With the thinking mind, with the conscious mind, one has to make a decision about one's life. Am I going to lose this 50 pounds once and for all or not? Am I going to get out of this shitty, relationship or not? Am I going to change jobs, start my own company, go back to school, whatever, or not? So it begins with making a decision. And then I believe personally, and I've been doing this for almost 20 years, then I think you have to study every single day. Every day. And what are you going to study? You have to study yourself. You have to study your mind. You have to study interesting, deep, philosophical things. So much good material out there. I mean, I think my book is a great place to start because it's simple to read in a way. It's less than 100 pages. It brings together a lot of ideas. But just like Spencer Johnson's book was a jumping off point for me, and I'm sure you had a jumping off point, a starting point, then you get going down a road. You start pursuing that knowledge, and you see the title of another book, or you hear about another individual who was knowledgeable in this area. So you research her, and you find her material, and you listen to her podcast, and you read his book, or you attend the seminar, or you get into therapy, or you do whatever it is. But it's like everything else. I don't like the terms diet and exercise. I like the idea of nutrition and training, right? So everybody eats every day. I mean, there aren't too many people go a whole day without eating. They always find time to eat, eating well or eating poorly, overeating, undereating. But the vast majority of people will find time every single day to eat, to bathe, to go to the bathroom, brush their teeth, basic things. But what percentage of people really take time to study outside of their professional obligations, whatever, to study who they are, what they're about, how their mind works, why they behave the way they do, how they could improve on that? And so that's where it begins for me. Making a decision that you're going to change, number one, and studying how to do that, number two. And then, of course, three, little by little, application, putting that into motion in the real world, in your real life, and then watching the results change slowly but surely over a period of time, knowing that it's an endless pursuit. There's no real goal line in this pursuit. There's only the road, and you're just traveling the road and trying to get better all the time.
Okay, I like that. So it's like you make the decision, okay, I'm going to change my programming. Two, you dedicate time to read or learn how to reprogram. So learn how the system works, learn everything from about the vehicle, the body, to the hardware, to the software, and if you're into it, to the spiritual element of being a spiritual being, because you got to know how to reprogram, or at least know the subject matter, and then the application is
minimum 30 minutes a day. And then, I think for most of us who are, real students of this, it's an hour or more, and ideally very early in the morning, but whenever you can do it. But I think most of the great, sort of teachers and scholars in this area suggest first thing in the morning before anybody's up. You're really just getting that habit of having that quiet, what I call silent solitude.
Right. When your mind, when the software is like most impressionable.
Right. And the outside world is least impressionable, equally as important, because we're connected. And I go through this in the book. We're connected to the physical world, the material world that we live in, through the five senses: sight, smell, sound, taste, and touch. And so the more inundated we are with TV and radio and websites and kids and loved ones and partners and music and noise, then it's hard to hear the inner voice, which is so essential. I mean, there are many people who never ever get a chance to hear their inner voice. So that hour of silent solitude early in the morning allows you to hear your inner voice, um, and begin to really think. And for many people, it's the first time they really think about anything, quite frankly.
Okay, I love it. And then that's how we make our own damn cheese.
That's how you get started, right? Through awareness. I love the word that you used. It's probably the top word. You know, Earl Nightingale used to say that the most important word was attitude. And I think that's a really, really important word. But I think the other A word, which is even bigger, is awareness. Most people don't have any awareness of any of this. I mean, zero.
I agree. And I mean, I didn't for the first 32 years of my life. And I've just come to have a whole new appreciation of awareness, because it's the first step to everything. And actually, then the second A word after awareness of any kind of change is acceptance. Like I'm in a place in my life where I'm starting to get this deeper understanding of, like, you have to accept where you are in order to change it. Like, you've got to accept your current reality. Not, that doesn't mean be okay with it, but just accept that that's what it is.
Right.
Which I think also helps with another A word, accountability.
Right. Yeah, there are lots of good A words. Action, there are tremendous A words. But to your point of accepting it, Eckhart Tolle, talks about the idea of surrendering. Now, now you have to be, and I think he's quite, good in trying to explain himself with that. Surrendering to the reality. You surrender to the reality that I'm unhappy at work. But that doesn't mean give up. That doesn't mean quit. That means face the facts. I hate my job. It's a great job. It's an important job. Someone needs to do it. I'm great at it. I hate it. I surrender to the fact that I hate it. So I'm not going to submit to the fact that I'm going to do it for the next 30 years. I'm going to leave this important job for somebody else to do who really enjoys it or is willing to hate it. And I'm going to go on with the rest of my life pursuing another area of the maze where hopefully I can be really good at it, serve other people, contribute, make a great living, and love going to work every day. Because I deserve that. We're here to, in the Ethics of Aristotle, whatever it is, 2,300 years ago, he says the reason we're here is to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how many people teach that today? Not a lot. I mean, that's like heresy. That's like whoa, why are you putting yourself first all the time? What does your happiness have to do with it? The garbage has to go out tonight. That's one of the great thinkers in known history came to the conclusion, and I agree with him wholeheartedly. The reason we're here to be here is happy. So if you're not happy, change it. The guy says, you're not a tree. If you're not happy where you're leaving, move.
Yep.
The goose can only fly south in the winter, but that doesn't pertain to you. The tree can only grow where the seed fell in the forest, but that doesn't pertain to you. If you don't like your blood pressure, change it. If you don't like your weight, change it. If you don't like your job, change it. This is the great revelation, is that we have this power to choose. We have this godlike power. Now, you're not a god, but you have a godlike power. No other creature in the known universe can do that, can change, because they make a decision to change. I talk about it in the book that I think the 6 most powerful words that have come down through time in religions, philosophies, and belief systems, etc., is that psychology, you become what you think about. You become what you think about. And the results never lie. If you look at your life, again, some things are easy metaphors. If you get on the scale and you're 300 pounds and you're not, Mr. Olympia, there's a problem, right? So that number reflects every single time, it reflects one thing ultimately: how you've been thinking, how you think about food, how you think about exercise, how you think about yourself, how you feel about yourself. It reflects how you've been thinking. And if you can change how you think, then you can reprogram the subconscious mind, which will invariably dictate your habitual behaviors. And almost all of our behaviors are habitual. And you'll see your results change like night and day.
I love it. And going back to our ongoing analogy, it's kind of like in terms of the results don't lie, like whatever is in the garden, that's what the seeds are. Like you
Right?
know what the seeds are by looking at what's sprouted out of the ground. So
It's so perfect, so beautiful, right? If we go out into the field and we see 3 rows of corn and 3 rows of cabbage and 3 rows of lettuce, you'd have to be an idiot not to know what was planted there.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a
Perfect.
mystery. The ancient philosophy says the oak tree sleeps in the acorn. Well, you know what's in there. It's an oak tree. You're not going to plant an acorn and get an elm tree.
Perfect. I absolutely love it. I want to close out with so you've mentioned a couple people that have been great teachers for you. So, Spencer Johnson's book, Eckhart Tolle. Who are a couple others, whether just books or individuals, that their work has really impacted you that could be good, study material for the rest of us?
Well, there are so many good ones, and I'm glad you're asking because I'm going to share with you. One of the places I started early on was with a guy who's unfortunately no longer with us. He was just so talented, Jim Rohn, and I want to thank him. Although he's not here, hopefully he can hear me. Once again, I've thanked him so many times for the impact he's had on my life. And one of the things that Jim Rohn shared was the fact that each of us should build a library. It should be one of your personal goals to build a library, because it really will change your life. If you're studying and reading great material and exposing your mind to great material, it changes your life. So Jim Rohn is at the top of my list. And what Jim Rohn said about the library is, it's going to start with the kind of people I'm telling you about now, that this little list that I'm going to give you. But what he said is, but then go further than these contemporary people that are so helpful, and follow up on the sources they're referring. Like if I talk about Aristotle, read something about the ethics of Aristotle. If I talk about Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, go get the book and read it. Study Viktor Frankl. Study Jung. Study these great thinkers. You can't just read the easy stuff. You got to get into the more difficult stuff too. It's a little heavy, it's a little dense, but you can do it. You're smart. You have all the time in the world. Get into some of the background material that they're referring to also eventually. But for the surface, Jim Rohn, Bob Proctor, amazing teacher. These are all characters are based in my book. Bob Proctor, Dennis Waitley, the author of Psychology of Winning and Seeds of Greatness, Brian Tracy, another amazing teacher, Price Pritchett, who wrote U Squared, another tiny little book that can change your life. And if you just start with those few names, Earl Nightingale, who wrote Think and Grow Rich, if you just start with those few names and study these people, they're going to turn you on to 1,000 more titles and 1,000 more teachers. It's endless. It's just such a beautiful way of living.
I couldn't agree more. And just heads up, everyone, you could end up creating a whole podcast dedicated to personal development, which is where my path led me.
Or being a guest on a great podcast, which is where mine led me, which is fantastic.
Yeah. So thank you so much for coming on. Tell everybody where they can find you, find your work, the book, follow you, all that stuff.
They can find the book at Amazon.com. It's called Make Your Own Damn Cheese. And they can find me at ChubackEducation.com. And my medical practice is ChubackMedical.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
It was a great pleasure. I hope to speak with you again sometime. We have a lot more to talk about.
Oh, for sure.
Thank you.
All right, that'll do it for today's episode. I hope you guys got as much out of this conversation as I did. I just thought it was so amazing. And thank you again to Dr. Chuback for coming on the show and sharing all of your insights. Don't forget, there will be another episode this week. It will air on Friday, and it is with Kate Svoboda, and we are talking really specifically about courage and living a courageous life. But it's also just so much great practical information on how to recognize and then disrupt the programming that we talked about today. So stay tuned for that. If you enjoyed the show, please take 2 minutes and leave the podcast a rating and write a short review. That helps a lot in the podcasting world, and it just means the world to me. And if you have feedback for me, you can always reach me at thebetteryoupodcast@gmail.com. All right, that is it. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you on Friday.